The penultimate episode of Ahsoka was okay. On today's The Story Geek Show here on the Orange Grove 55 Network, we're breaking down episode 7 of Ahsoka and discussing the overall state of Star Wars. And as always, with every week, we have a fantastic panel today to discuss this. I'm going to go to the bottom first. I'm going to go to Mr. John Hoey from the Resistance broadcast, somebody who's been in the Star Wars space for a long time. We call Orange Grove 55 OG, but you are like the Star Wars podcasting OG, John.
Yes. Oh, I don't know about that because there's ones that have been around forever, like Rebel Force Radio. And,
well, that's true too. Yeah,
I mean a ton of them, but I appreciate it, and it's good to be here because I know we've interacted a bunch on, I guess they call it X now, and I mean Orange Grove OG. You had been following us for a long time, and then we've interacted a lot. So it's cool to actually have a real chat because I don't know that I've bumped into you guys at celebrations or anything. I don't know if you've been to celebrations, but that's always a whirlwind. But it's nice to just have a real chat. It's cool.
Yeah. It's an absolute pleasure to have you on. So thanks for joining us today. And as always, we've got the Grand Admiral of the Orange Grove 55 Network, Mr. OG. How you doing, sir?
I am doing absolutely fantastic. John, thank you so much again for coming on, brother. Talking some Star Wars with us. Been a big fan of yours for a really long time. So it's an absolute honor to have you on board, sir. And I mean, you can find me here in Orange Grove 55 talking a lot of theme park stuff, but we get to dive into the nerd stuff like Star Wars, Marvel, all that good stuff. So here, we'll get the party started. Star Tour style.
Love it. I will say, just to start the conversation, I have never actually been to a Star Wars celebration, and part of that is just because I'm not a huge con person. Whether it's San Diego Comic-Con or any of these places, like I find them very overwhelming, and I have a hard time like figuring out where exactly to plug in. So I don't do it that often. So I wish I would have to met more people, but I've met more people through podcasting. So that's kind of where I get most of my interaction. So let's dive into episode 7 here of Ahsoka. We're coming off 3 stellar episodes of Ahsoka, and normally we give like a scale of 1 to 10 rating. And you guys do the same thing, John. So I listened to you say, I know what your rating is because I just listened to it today. But rather than do that this time, as a storyteller, sometimes what I want to do is assess what we're seeing and ask the question of why. Like, why is one episode better than another episode? So rather than say, let's rank it at a scale of 1 to 10, what I thought we could do is actually take this episode of Ahsoka, episode 7, and put it in relationship to the other episodes that we've seen of this particular season of television. So I'll start with you, John. Like, what do you think? Where does this episode rank in these 7 episodes we've gotten so far?
Yeah, I would say it's on the lower side, but at the same time, I really enjoyed it. And I felt like they sort of made a stew and sort of put everything in it. Like you go from having a legacy cameo like C-3PO to having those naughty creatures again, and you got more Thrawn, and you got Ezra, Sabine, Ahsoka. Like it's like Favreau says, you took the bin of action figures, you dumped it on the floor, and you started playing, and that's sort of what it felt like. But I also feel like this isn't one of those episodes like Chapter 16 of Mando the Rescue, where people can be like, remember Chapter 16, or remember the Crate Dragon, or though this isn't going to be one of those episodes where people go, oh, remember Part 7 of Ahsoka. But at the same time, we need it to set the table for the finale, which I don't think is going to have any major conclusion, because I think this is springboarding into a second season or Mando season 4 or whatever is going to ultimately end with that movie that Filoni's doing. So I temper those expectations, but this certainly sets the table where Thrawn's ready to go, the Rebels crew's back together, they're ready to go, and it's going to be like this race to go back to the known galaxy. So this is more of like establishing the relationships again, establishing the villain a little bit more for people who don't know Thrawn, and setting the table for Part 8. So it's sort of like I think this is serving part 8 more than anything.
Yeah, that makes a lot of
Well
sense.
said.
That makes a lot of sense. What do you think, OG? How does this one? Where does this one rank for you?
Yeah, I would agree with John on a lot of what he said there. I mean, it's not an earth-shattering episode by any means. You know, people aren't going to be talking about this for years to come or anything like that. But I thought the episode was good. I thought there were actually a lot of cool elements within it. I actually thought the C-3PO cameo made a lot of sense. Sometimes when you throw in a cameo, sometimes it maybe feels a little forced, and it's kind of like this ta-da kind of moment. This felt natural. It felt organic. I like that. It made a lot of sense in the context. I think John is right. I think that they're setting up the stage for the finale. So I think depending on, I think it's kind of too early to kind of almost say if this episode is doing a good job or not without seeing the finale. I think once we see the finale and how it set the table and how it concluded, I think we can kind of get a better picture as to whether or not this episode was as effective as it could have been. But I had fun with it. I mean, I thought there was a lot in here. You know, I also do want to say, I've said many times, I think the gal who plays Sabine is awesome, but the woman who plays Ezra, I think he's doing a phenomenal job in this.
Great job.
Very,
Yeah,
very good. So, yeah, he's been great. So overall, I had a good time with it. But again, like, you know, it's not changing your life or anything, but you know.
I'm still waiting for them to give us a good shot, a good close up of his eyes, because his eyes are so quintessential to the Rebels series that I feel like we need a close up of it, because you can see that they've got, you know, contacts or whatever they're doing digitally enhancing his eyes a little bit. And I'm like, man, give us the close up of this. This is great.
Yeah.
So let me take a couple of different things here. I think that episode 1 and 2 are sort of like good, right? So I would associate this episode 7, with episodes 1 and 2. I would have said that episode 3 to me was not very good. It's not terrible, just not very good. It wasn't very cohesive. It was an odd thing to put in there at that time, based on where I thought the story structure was going. So this one was not bad at all. This was good, but it wasn't as good as the last 3, right? 4, 5, and 6 were all like outstanding. So I started asking myself, what made those outstanding and this one not as that tier of level? And this is what I came up with. I want to get your guys' reaction to this. Sure. And I do have a thought about 3PO too, but that's totally separate. We'll get to that in a minute. My thought process was, all of the beats are there that needed to get us from the beginning of this episode to the end of this episode and then set up the finale. The issue I had with this episode is it didn't seem to take the beats and make them emotional, tense, and increasing in conflict. So let me just give you some examples, right? Like, everything happened that needed to happen, but there were no moments where I felt like Ahsoka was in danger. There were no big moments where I felt like Ezra or Sabine were really going to have something bad happen to them. There was not even a moment where Thrawn seemed to be like, I know that we never see Thrawn off his game, but there was no moment where we even got him being like, let me step aside and like think about this for a little bit and figure out what needs to happen for me to win, right? And it just felt like it was as opposed to, let's just say, a lot of people complain about Andor and say that Andor is too slow. Andor is one of my favorite shows, one of my favorite Star Wars things. I go, Andor is dripping with tension, right? Like, now people say it's like, okay, there's not enough action. I get that, but it's dripping with tension. It's like, just go ask one of the Andor like directors or writers, like, how do you splice this in here? So what is your take on that? Did it just seem like we kind of went through the motions kind of quickly? Could we have gotten more out of there, or do you think it was good enough?
I don't know whose turn it is, but
go ahead, John. Go ahead.
Well, I think these shows are tricky in that regard, because I think for if Obi-Wan was a movie like it was supposed to be, or if Boba Fett was a movie, you know, maybe some of those episodes don't exist. You know, if Ahsoka was a movie, this whole story that we got in this series could probably be chopped up in like 40 minutes of a movie. So we have to keep that in mind. I like the serialized thing that they're doing. But I feel like your point about Andor, it's like, I felt like Tony Gilroy's like, we're going to put these episodes into like relationships where it's like, 1, 2, and 3 are going to be together, and then this one, and this one. I feel like Ahsoka is a little bit like that, where 7 and 8 are sort of pairing together, and we got the slow burn for 7, and then 8's going to be the back end where everything has the climax and lifts. So I agree. This episode didn't have big swings, like you were saying. Like episode 4, it's like the Marek thing. It's like we finally got rid of all the theories on that nonsense, and then the big fight and the decision Sabine makes, and Ahsoka falls off the cliff. You're like, oh my god, literally a cliffhanger. And then the next episode's the Anakin one, and that's just monumentally huge, and it has to be, and it was. So and then we finally get to the new galaxy in the last one. So like all these big things were checked off, whereas this one, because those 3 were so big, this one probably felt like it was flat, and maybe it was a little bit, but it had the fun element of Star Wars that I think Dave Filoni likes to play with sometimes too. And it's like, you think about George Lucas, and he may do this to poke at critics sometimes, but I think he said his favorite episode of the Clone Wars is when like the droids were lost off on an adventure somewhere. His favorite characters, Jar Jar, and it's like, you know, maybe George would watch this series and be like, 7 was my favorite because you got the goofiness, you got the creatures, you got Ezra being a little cheeky, and you know, that sort of thing. So it's true. I think it's to each their own, but I think this series has been so good that this episode may have felt like a little bit of a down kick, but maybe that's so we get completely punched in the face by Rick Famuyiwa in part 8, because now we brought down a little bit, and then it's going to go right back up.
Yeah,
100%. I'm glad you brought up Rick, because I did not know he was directing 8, but that's awesome because he's done a phenomenal
he's the closer
job.
Now he's the Mariano Rivera.
Yeah, he's awesome. What were you gonna say, OG?
No, John is right. Like, I think that like it's almost like, I feel like this episode is almost like when you pull back like a bow and arrow, right? So this episode's like we're pulling back a little bit. So 8 will be the let go, and we're gonna shoot off. So I think that's kind of where we're going with this. And I mean, I think that you have a good point there, Jay. I mean, there are elements in this where it's like, okay, that didn't hit as much as you thought it would have, like with the Ahsoka Ezra thing at the end. It was good, but it didn't have that same kind of punch that a lot of other moments within the series have had. And I think it is largely due to what John was saying, where there's been so many of these big moments in this series that it kind of like you get to this now, and it's like, while these might be good, it just pales in comparison. So maybe if these moments happened, in episode in the beginning of the show, maybe we would feel differently, right? Not followed up by all these other things. So it's interesting. Definitely the fun factor was there, as John was saying. It definitely does feel like a continuation of Rebels, which I absolutely love. I don't know. I'm having fun with it. I got to see what this finale is going to be. I got to see how they conclude this thing, and then I'll get like a better sense of my opinion on this episode, I think.
Yeah. Part of it for me is trying to understand, as a storyteller, what did one episode do that another episode didn't. And so, not to belabor the point, but like you brought up episode 4, John, and episode 4 is sort of a master class of like tension, conflict, and stakes, because literally that episode revolves around the fact that if Ahsoka does not destroy the map in time, Thrawn is coming back perceptively. And so there's just the stakes on that are huge. But for Baylan, the stakes are equally as high, because if he can't get to where he's going, then his plan fails. And so, I was saying, I was on our buddy Nerd Souls podcast, and I said, like, if Ahsoka stops Baylan and destroys that map, it's roll credits. I mean, the series is over, right? Like there's no bringing back Thrawn, like it's done. And so being able to say, like, what are the stakes here and how can I play with the stakes from a storytelling perspective can really give you that tension in a way that I think is really powerful. Now, to your guys' points, which I 100% agree with, we don't need that out of this episode, particularly because we're headed into the finale. And I think that's a really good point. But I do think this transitions into, by the way, I'm not going to get into the C-3PO thing because I did talk about it with Nerd Soul the other day. So you can go listen to that podcast if you want to hear me talk about that. But we were talking about how C-3PO is literally like one of the most famous droids in the galaxy, and they have to stop him and get his ID and get his credentials. It's like, dude, this is one of the most popular droids. He was up there getting medals. I mean, come on, give me a break.
That was definitely a nod to Obi-Wan doing the mind trick on the stormtroopers.
Yes, it was.
Like, you don't need to ask for my identification. I'm like, yeah, you go, 3PO. You were listening. You remember. All right.
I'm actually glad you guys brought that up on your show. And by the way, please go support John's show, the Resistance Broadcast. Check it out. And I did not catch that.
We'll link it down in the description below too. So everyone, make sure you check them out.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Go check him out for sure. Okay, so let's get into my second question here. There's still a lot of mystery about whatever Baylan is up to, right? Fantastic new character. I think I haven't heard a negative thing said about that character this whole time. Fantastic character. He's definitely on some sort of mission, but we don't really know what it is. Is it okay that we don't know? What do we think he's after? And then the real thing that everyone's surmising here is, do you think Abeloth is calling him, like many are saying that they think that she is? So what do you think, OG? I'll start with you this time. What's Baylan doing?
Okay, so here's my thing. You're saying, is it okay to sort of?
Oh yeah, is it okay?
To not know yet, right?
Yeah.
Yes and no. It kind of depends, because this is the problem with kind of stringing the audience along. I don't mean that in a negative way. I mean kind of like, what I'm saying, where you're kind of like having this mystery that kind of goes on and on and on. If they stick the landing, then it's going to be like amazing, like orgasmic. Oh man, this is it. We're waiting and waiting and waiting, and then the final episode comes, like, oh my God, that was amazing, right? Okay, so then it's a great idea. The problem with this, though, if it doesn't stick the landing, because now you've had weeks and weeks and weeks of speculation. So that you run the risk of disappointing fans, because this happens a lot, even like with Marvel, with WandaVision, all that time with that kid, the Quicksilver kid. There was all these rumors about, oh, what is he, that and this, that, and the other. Yeah. So the episode ended with like a boner joke about him, right? It was like a super letdown, right, for a lot of people. So that, obviously, I don't think that's going to happen in this show. Nothing like that, But I do think you run a risk when you kind of have that mystery go on for a real long time, and then people their headcanon gets kind of wild, and then you might not, the reality might not live up to the headcanon. So that's my only fear with it. Personally, I kind of buy into the Abeloth theory. I think that's where this is going. I do, and I think that'd be a really cool thing, because Abeloth is only, as far as I know, not canon, right? It's Legends, I believe.
Yeah, I don't think it's canon at all.
Yeah, I don't think it's been in any.
Even heard of it. I hadn't even read any of the additional stuff, so I never heard of it until the people started.
I didn't really read Legends either. The closest was I played Shadow of the Empire.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, when I heard the theory, I was like, I got to get Googling here. Figure out
I was the same. I never got into that stuff either, and I was kind of like going through it and like kind of looking to see like what kind of character this was, and she seems really interesting, almost like a Star Wars version of like a horror kind of creature character, like very, very gruesome and creepy. I like that, and I think it'd be an interesting element to kind of insert into Star Wars. And Filoni kind of just being a Star Wars nerd, I can kind of see him kind of like pulling from Legends and various things and more deep cutty stuff. So I would not be surprised if that does occur, and I'd be down for it. I think it'd be fun. Why not? Like, I don't think that Thrawn. I mean, obviously, Thrawn's a baddie, right? A big baddie, and I just feel like there's something bigger out there that's going to kind of be the main threat, and then they're going to end on that, and that's going to set it up for like season 2 or whatever.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, John, what do you think?
Yeah, the biggest problem with the Baylan thing is that Ray Stevenson died. So that's the biggest question is, we know for a fact we only have one episode left with this actor.
Yep.
No, so the question is, does Baylan get killed? Which would be the biggest letdown, because they've been hinting at this whole thing all season that if we get to it and he's like, all right, now I'm ready to tell you my plan was, and it's like, they just kill him or something. Like, so I don't think they're going to kill him, which then makes it even harder, because then it's like, all right, what do they do? Do they recast? Do they, Cara Dune him? Like, who knows what the plan ends up being. But in terms of what his plan is, I mean, the closest thing that I've tried to put together was that because he says like everything's cyclical and history repeats itself and I'm here to stop that, it's almost like he's trying to eliminate, that maybe eliminate the Jedi, eliminate the Sith, and not really what Kylo Ren was saying, which is like, I'm going to do my own angsty version of taking over the galaxy with this girl that I have the hots for. Balin wants to like start the galaxy over, almost like Thanos, it seems.
Yes.
And like do it, make, like Anakin said, make things the way we want them to be, Yep. And I think because he still has admiration for what the Jedi sort of were. Like we've seen him still speak in a weird way kindly about what it was to be a Jedi. From an idealistic standpoint, he just thought how they executed things was constantly leading to failure, and the same thing with empires. So he's sort of like, he is a mercenary, he is sort of a wild card. I just feel like he wants to start things over, and I don't know if that's why he had interest in this other galaxy, but that's the closest I can come up with. Now, I don't know what other forces are involved with that, but I just hope that we get something tangible, because it is getting a little too long-winded with like these teases of what he wants to do. It's just like, let us know now, because clearly Shin is not buying into what you got going on, and you're letting her go, even though you said you were training her to be something more, and you're clearly not dialed in with Thrawn, and Elsbeth doesn't like him, and there's no love between him and Ahsoka and the Rebels, so he's not turning face, not to bring up a wrestling term, but he's sort of like on his own island here. And you're right, OG. It's like, how do they stick the landing enough for fans to be like, so this is the end of Ray Stevenson as this character, and what do we do from this point on? And my last thought on this is, did they have to do anything from an editing perspective because Ray Stevenson died that changes the trajectory of the show, sort of the way Christopher Nolan's Batman trilogy changed when Heath Ledger died? Yeah. Or sorry, a Star Wars example, Episode 9 changed when Carrie Fisher died.
Right. Yeah, and I'm on the same page as you, John. Well, I'm on the same page as both of you, but in different ways. So I'm on the same page as OG, except that I think that fan speculation is gone off the rails a little bit in every franchise. I don't think we're getting some sort of special Legends character. I don't think it's set up for that. I think we would have had more clues earlier on in the series if we were going to get that. So I don't think it's going to be Aboleth. However, I do think the intent of introducing something really intense for Balin's character is accurate. And so more to where John is going with it, like this restarting of the galaxy, what I've been saying is, I think he's either going to try and get to the beginning of the Force and destroy the Force throughout the galaxy in its entirety, because then you effectively destroy the Sith and the Jedi, and any sort of tension between them, you stop the cycle. Or he's going to try and take all of the Force into himself and then be able to be the most powerful character. I don't know which one of those things he thinks is powerful, but that seems to be where, in my mind, this would be heading. Now, it's theoretically possible that he could get there through Aboleth, but I just think that that's probably taking it too much into the lore in a way that, like, because WandaVision, it was the same thing. Not only was it about Quicksilver, it was also about whether Mephisto was going to show up, right?
Yeah,
it was
exactly.
Like, everyone kept speculating on that stuff, and I think that when you go so far into what if it was this, it's fun to do. Don't get me wrong. Like, entire podcasts are built off that. Entire shows are built off like speculation. We should totally speculate. It's fun, but at the same time, I think we have to keep our expectations in check, because we can be pretty disappointed if they don't get us to that place, right? Yeah. But I mean, RIP to Ray Stevenson, because this character is amazing, and he's been amazing in the role. And it's a bummer that we don't get to see him carry it forward. But I do think that I kind of was thinking, to your point, John, about whether or not they're going to re-edit this. To me, it doesn't feel like it's been re-edited. And if it was going to be re-edited, there's no way they could be playing with us for this long. Because if it's just going to be like, he dies in the end, it's like, what? That's a bummer.
Right. Yeah.
Which then brings up, what do you do? Like you said, what do you do then at that point?
I know.
I have no idea. Maybe put a different character behind a mask, I don't know.
Oh yeah, turn him into the Mountain from Game of Thrones.
Yeah, exactly.
Make a zombie Balin or whatever. But the thing about the Legends thing is that I just from a logical perspective of the career of Dave Filoni, it's like, all right, everything he's done has involved Ahsoka. It's like, all right, that's cool. That's cool. But then it's like, all right, now they're bringing in Thrawn, who's a Legends character from Timothy Zahn, and Filoni's like, all right, I'm going to play with this character here. I did it in Rebels. I'm doing it here. If they bring in then another Legends thing, people are going to be like, this guy's just ripping Legends stuff. It's his first show, and he's going to lean on this non-canon stuff that George Lucas never considered canon. I think that'd be a bad look for his career. So I think like they borrowed enough, I think, where it's like, okay, like Filoni's like, all right, we're up to ankle deep in Legend stuff. We don't want to get waist high here. Let's pump the brakes. I still like the idea, OG, of some weird mystical dark thing. Like I love when Star Wars gets wicked and mystical and weird and magical like that. But I just think from a perspective of Filoni launching his new, creative executive, directing movies and writing shows and show running, for him to borrow too much from, Legends, I think would be a bad look.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Well, there's also the aspect of if that darkness. I love the idea, OG, of the darkness. Yeah. That's a fantastic idea. It seems more akin to what Shin would be looking for. It doesn't seem like Balin is looking to have the dark or the light take over. He's looking to just make his move. So my thought process was that he was going to try to access the world between worlds in some kind of way, because then he could time travel and go back to the very beginning. He said he wanted to go back to the beginning, right? And I think that we talked about it last week on the show. I think that gives us a preview into where James Mangold's movie could go if we see some kind of there's the beginning, and then it's like take off from there. But we'll see. I mean, who knows? They could go in so many different ways now. And like you guys talked about on the Resistance broadcast, we're at the end of episode 8 is not like the end of anything because it's just the beginning of a lot more stuff.
I'm worried people think that they need to tie everything up, and then people are going to be like, really? Like this? Because because when they announced this show and they were marketing this show like way back, it was called a limited series. So I don't know if people caught on to that, and then they're going to watch, the last episode and be like, seriously? Now I got to go buy books or something? Like what? But exactly. I think everything changed, and we've even seen the Mandalorian shift, and even Favreau's talked about like, what does the Mandalorian mean? It first started with, this Clint Eastwood style lone Western cowboy gunman, whatever. And now it's like, well, the Mandalorian could be, everyone. It's Bo-Katan now and stuff. And say what you want about season 3. I hated the Lizzo Jack Black episode.
Oh,
and now from a PR perspective, that's aged horribly. And so now they're creating this Mando verse thing that's going to lead up to his movie. So I think there's going to be more Ahsoka, but even if they don't do more Ahsoka, they can continue it in the movie. It really depends on what the timeline is. And that's the other thing, which I know you wanted to talk about, not to jump ahead, but like the future of movies still seems a little cloudy. I know the strikes are dying down right now, but I got to see something rolling on camera, because the amount of movies that they've announced and have come and gone or haven't been talked about, and like, I gotta see them rolling on some of these films, because Star Wars in the theater, big movies, is, in my opinion, still when it's at its best.
And that's a bad place to be. Like, I mean, you never want to get to a point where the fans no longer trust you, right? So like they're announcing stuff, this movie, that show, this show, and fans are like, well, it sounds cool, but is it going to happen? And that's a bad place to be. I agree with you, John. They got to start delivering and start like filming this stuff and getting the stuff released, because a lot of fans are like kind of checking out because they don't believe that any of the stuff's going to happen.
Yeah. And every time they announce it, though, we're all still like, yeah. And then like the next day, it's like when you party hard, the next day you're like, oh, what'd I do? Like,
That's awesome. I like that analogy. Let's go ahead and jump into that right now. This was my last question, but since we're on this track, let's go ahead and jump in here. Sure. And John, I'll start with you. We haven't seen episode 8 of Ahsoka yet, so we're a little early, but because you've been specifically talking about this stuff for such a long period of time, I want to get your take on this. what is the current state of Star Wars? If you go look at X, or if you go look at YouTube, or if you listen to podcasts, you will get it's never been better. You will get it's the worst it's ever been. Like, you're going to get all of the above. But what do you think? Take us through, like, what has been your journey in this space, and like, where do you think Star Wars is at right now?
Yeah, I think it depends on how you look at it from content standpoint, and then a functional standpoint with like Lucasfilm, because I think even the most diehard defenders of Kathleen Kennedy probably, I think even people I've talked to are at the point where they're like, yeah, I mean, they might need another voice. And, you know, I use an analogy, like I'm a huge baseball fan. I love the New York Yankees, and like they've had a horrible season, and I want them to be so good, but I'm like, maybe it's time for a new manager. And that's not a bad thing. You know, she's been in the seat for 11 years.
Yeah.
Churned out billion-dollar movies. But so, and I've liked all the things that they've made. It's just when you also think of, like, if you want to talk about alternate universes and stuff, it's like, what could have it also looked like if certain projects, you know, went through and they made other decisions? Like the last week when I heard David Goyer talking about how, like, yeah, I wrote a Star Wars movie, and it was, I guess, the same thing Mangold is doing now, which I like Mangold, so that's cool. But he's like, yeah, and Guillermo del Toro was going to do a movie, but things are all messed up over there at Lucasfilm. I'm like, holy cow, they had Guillermo del Toro wanting to do something, and they didn't do it. And now you're like, who's directing the next movie? Who? Charmaine Obaid Chinoy? Like, yeah, oh, she won an Oscar for a documentary. Cool. She's never directed a movie. So you get Guillermo del Toro, who wants to do a movie, and that for some reason doesn't work out. But then you're like, let's just give this person who's it's like the movie Armageddon. Let's get oil drillers to land on an asteroid and save the Earth, instead of getting people who know how to land on asteroids.
Oh, well said, John.
I hope she makes the greatest Star Wars movie ever made. But I'm just saying, like, when you've been struggling so hard to get these movies made, how is your go-to giving a movie to somebody who's literally never made a feature film? So it's just, and that's just, it's not a hate on her. It's just a logical question. That's all.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And Disney has all the resources in the world. You can get the Del Toros, you know, I mean, I don't understand it, you know, it doesn't make any sense. And I don't know. Yeah, it's frustrating.
The state of Star Wars, I think, is good, because we're still getting Star Wars. Like, if it was up to George Lucas, we wouldn't be sitting here talking right now. So that part's good. I think a lot of the stuff we're getting is good. I thought Obi-Wan was a misfire. I don't know what happened there, because every time I see a new scene in Ahsoka, it makes Obi-Wan look worse. Because
That's true.
Because Andor is one thing. Andor is its own aesthetic. It's that Tony Gilroy, like, very real looking stuff. And you could, like, put that show on, make that take place on Earth, and still a lot of that would work. Yeah. But like the fantastical stuff, like Obi-Wan, which is Force driven, and Ahsoka, like, I'm looking at a lot of the shots, I'm like, this looks incredible, and then Obi-Wan looks like very, like, a lot of spots look really like low budget and cheap and stuff. And I just don't know what happened. So there's clearly, it could be better. And we always do it every season. We do a show called The State of Star Wars on our podcast. And sometimes we get so critical by the end of it, I'm like, guys, I hope people don't get all pissed at us that we were critical. But we're always trying to be honest and respectful about it. Yeah. But the thing that I think will make me believe again is, again, the movies. But I just think next year, Kathleen Kennedy's contract's up. We have the celebration the year after. I don't think she's going to be the president by that time. And Bob Iger is extending himself. He's got a lot of pressure on him. He's a villain now, according to everyone, due to the strikes and what he's been saying. I could see him making a change there. I could see them, even, unless it's in a contract that when Lucas sold it, that you can't dissolve my studio. You have to still have Lucasfilm as an entity. If that's not in there, I could see Disney swooping up Lucasfilm and saying, like, you're not having a president anymore. We'll give you a creative lead, and that'll be the guy in the hat that everyone loves right now, but no more president, or something like that. So it's hard for me to say what the state of Star Wars is, because I think we're at a pivotal point where big changes are about to be made in the next, like, year or so, and then we'll really have an idea what the next 10 years is going to look like.
Yeah. Really good stuff. You got anything to add to that, OG?
Yeah, well, I think that right now, look, back, in 2016, 2017, when Kennedy was sort of like firing like Lord Miller and things like that, I mean, it was never good news, but I think Disney was in a different place as a company then, right? Right now, they're taking a toll financially, and they're really cutting back. There were like 7,000 layoffs, this past year and stuff like that. So I think that when you're an executive like Kennedy, who is kind of known for like, okay, here's a project. Oh, now we're going to cancel that project. Here's a director. Okay, like 70% through the movie, we're going to cut that director and bring someone new in. That kind of stuff is expensive. And I can see an Iger right now in this current environment getting frustrated with that. Like, we can't afford that right now. As a company, you got to get your stuff together and really handle this, So I think the logistics with Kennedy is like the biggest issue, because I'm with John. I actually like a lot of the content that has come out under the Disney umbrella. It's the behind the scenes, the director drama, the stuff like that, the breaking the trust with fans when you announce something, it doesn't happen, things like that. So I think that's a big issue. I think with the fandom and stuff too, like, I think it's weird because it's hard to kind of get like a good grasp as to where the fandom is, because there's a lot of like this monetization of like, just, hey, look, hating Star Wars is like huge money on YouTube. I mean, people, but you can buy, a new house with that. I mean, it's crazy. It's turned into an industry. It really has.
That's right.
So you have a bunch of that kind of stuff funneled in, and it's like, it's hard to kind of pick out where fans really are and what's the grift, right? Because it all kind of gets blended together. And I think that's an issue right now. It's kind of determining, but, I think we'll be okay. I think I agree with John. I think in the next year or so, I think Kennedy will be gone, and I think that we'll probably get a new head. I don't know who that's gonna be. Maybe they'll do like a duo. It'll be like Filoni and Favreau, because Filoni's a creative guy. He knows Star Wars. He's very, very good at what he does, but he doesn't have the Hollywood chops for like an executive role. So you would have to bring in someone like a Favreau, I think, for that element. So maybe they'll do like the Favreau Filoni team up to run the studio or something like that. I'd be okay with that. I think in terms of like the content, I think Ahsoka's been great. Kenobi looked cheap in some parts. So did Book of Boba Fett, to be honest. A lot of the stuff in there, it was like hit or miss. Yeah. Some of that might be due to the pandy, because I think those two shows were kind of hit the hardest with the pandy and the lockdowns and all that. So things might have been a little weird with that. But I don't know. I mean, look, as a Star Wars fan, as long as they keep churning out stuff, I'll be here to watch it. I absolutely love it. I've been really enjoying Ahsoka, so I can't complain too much. That's kind of where I'm at right now.
That makes sense.
Real quick, you brought up the two-headed monster thing, and I always thought that could be a good idea, but my thought is more so get someone who's a great executive, like get, your version of Thrawn for a movie executive who's sort of behind the scenes. Like, we don't know, we forget who that person's name is. They run like sometimes they're like, who's the head of Universal? It's like, I don't know. I forget. I want that. I don't want to know who the executive is of Lucasfilm, and then have Filoni be, like you said, the creative head. He's already almost there. He's creative executive. I think he's involved in, you hear about him being involved in these powwows about the future of movies. Let him be the person that marches out there the way Kathleen Kennedy does now and say, here's what we have coming up from Star Wars, and have Filoni be that voice, because the fans love him. It's a no-brainer, because he's the one thing still connected to George Lucas. He's his understudy. It just makes so much sense for that to be the case. And then he'll be the face, he'll be the creative driver, and then have a suit making the deals behind the scenes to get the directors in. Have someone savvy on the business side, because Kathleen Kennedy, great producer, her resume, I would love to have it. Executive, maybe not so good at that. There's a difference between being a good film producer, which I think she knows how to, get what she needs to from that perspective. But as an executive, I think that's where she didn't have the chops, and it's showing because people say like, well, Star Wars is just heightened because people focus on it. It's like, show me how many Marvel movies were canceled. Show me how many DC movies, even though as bad as they might have been, that were canceled. It's like, at least they finished making them. They didn't release them, but they finished making Batgirl.
Oh yeah. You bring a great point. Under Disney as a company, these subsidiaries, Yeah, look, Pixar doesn't have like, 7 movies they canceled,
Right.
Marvel doesn't have that, but Lucasfilm does. So that's an issue. And then a lot of fans will tell you, well, look at Kathleen Kennedy, like you said, John, look at Kathleen Kennedy's resume. She's a great producer, and she is. But just because you're a great player doesn't mean you're a great coach.
Exactly.
And that's the problem.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And which if she leaves next year, I'll say thank you for taking this on. Like, you're filling the biggest shoes possible. Our hero, George Lucas, like who would want to take that gig? And she did. And I think overall it was successful. It could have completely went terribly. It could have been horrible.
Yeah.
So we have to think about that too. We have to look at like the good side of it. And I'll say thank you, but also be like, all right, what's next? Like it's it's nuanced. It doesn't have to be like, yeah, she's gone, screw her. It's like, all right, thank you, but now we're gonna move on, and that's all right.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I think she could have saved herself a long time ago had she hired a Kevin Feige. But she didn't do that, which was interesting. It was an interesting choice. She could, we're looking at Marvel. She is on the inside of that because literally Marvel is across the. I'm not saying their offices are across the hallway, but theoretically speaking, it's all under the same umbrella. And you're looking at that going like, this is one of the most successful movie franchises right now, in history, actually. And what are they doing that I'm not doing, right?
Mm-hmm.
But instead, she did put herself out there in a way that was, I want to be the figurehead. I'm going to wear the t-shirts that say the Force is female. I'm going to put myself out there. That's not a comment on feminism. It's just a comment on she wanted that moment to happen. It wasn't like she was going to be behind the scenes, it just kind of, she wanted those things to happen. She wanted to be in front of the camera, or she was pressured to. That's the other option that could have happened. Here's where I think it's interesting with Kathleen Kennedy specifically. If you take the content itself, I think the content, both of you guys have said this, and I totally agree. It's a little hit or miss, but overall pretty good, right? I mean, if you were to say, one of the things I ask people all the time is, if you were to take George Lucas and see his hit to miss ratio, it's not that much different than Kathleen Kennedy's hit to miss ratio. She's done more things at this point in time, but in terms of I think you can make a pretty good argument. I know that there's a lot of prequel fans out there. Not trying to make any of you guys pissed off. I'm a prequel fan too. But those first 2 films have moments of 10 and moments of 1 or 2 out of 10. You know what I mean? So my point is, I think that Kathleen Kennedy has done a fairly decent job with the content. I think the problem with Kathleen Kennedy is, and this is why I think that Iger has a tough job here, is that if we heard her say at Celebration, we have never been a television studio, we've always been a movie studio. But they asked us, pretty much Chapek at that point, can you do TV shows? Because everybody's going to be sitting at home and they're not going to be going to movies. So can you do TV shows? And they put their best foot forward. She said, Favreau's not a TV guy either, but we put our best foot forward. We started doing TV shows. This is what I think has happened with Kathleen Kennedy specifically. I think that she has released one feature film that didn't perform well financially. Solo. Every other feature film that she has released knocked it out of the ballpark in terms of financial performance. Now, when it comes to the TV shows, she can look right back at Iger and go, Chapek told me to do TV shows, so I did TV shows. What do you want me to do? I did what I was asked. So I think that she has this she has an argument to be made for herself that she interpreted the strategy correctly and she tried to put out what she put out. What you guys have nailed, and you've nailed it perfectly, so I don't need to say it again, but just to reiterate some of the key points here, there's obviously not a very strong vision component with where Lucasfilm is and where Lucasfilm is going. And if you're the head of a studio in the modern environment, you cannot operate without a vision. You will get what we saw with the sequel trilogy, which was all over the place and they didn't know where it was going. You will get movies where you say you're going to release them and then you pull them back. And that is not a great way to run a studio. You don't want to have this swath of bodies that you went through to the point where people don't want to work with you anymore, right? Even though you have Star Wars properties. So Star Wars, I think, is I don't think it's in a bad place, but I think it's sort of in this tenuous place. Where's it gonna go? Because there is no vision. So I don't know where it's going. And you can come up with every argument in the book because nobody is sitting there telling you this is the way we're going and it's going to be awesome when we get there. And that's a tough place. That's a tough pill to swallow, especially from a fandom and people who want to work on your project. So I think you guys nailed it with that.
Yeah, it's a murky. It's very murky. It's very hard to tell where the direction it's going in, and that's tough. And that's tough.
Yeah, there's just a feeling, and I've talked to people who know people inside the walls at Lucasfilm and stuff, and I don't do any like reporting of that nature anymore. I don't work for a site anymore, but there's just this feeling that there is not a certain level of confidence that you would think a heavyweight like Star Wars should have. Right. And it almost felt like, and look, you're talking to the guy who did the Make Solo 2 Happen stuff. I think sometimes they listen too much to online fandom and react to it. Yep. And it's like, all right, who's popular now? Oh, Wonder Woman was good. Let's get Patty Jenkins and have her direct a Star Wars movie. And Taika, people like this Taika guy. Let's bring him in. Jurassic World made $1 billion. Let's get that guy. And then those people put out stinkers, and then those projects go away. And like James on our show, like famously said that he's like, if you get hired to make a Star Wars movie, don't make another movie after you get hired. There's a curse. Book of Henry. Wonder Woman 84. Like go down the list. However you think about the Thor movies, but there just seems like there's been whispers of that she had retreats with her creative team. I'm like, we got to figure out what to do with the future of movies and stuff. And then you look at that block that you're talking about, Jay, where Iger's legacy to handoff was like, we're going to make Disney Plus, and that's going to be my legacy. It's going to be this big thing. And then he leaves, and it stumbles a bit, and what have you. And they're trying to make some shifts and pay attention to what Netflix is doing to keep up with that. But if you take after Rise of Skywalker in 2019, and we still don't have any movies yet. Nothing is being filmed. If it wasn't for Favreau and Filoni with Favreau, I mean, those guys have been honestly the life raft for the last few years. Because take away what they've made, you have Obi-Wan and and Andor. Obi-Wan and Andor. Yeah. Other than that, I mean, that's from 2009 to now. A 6-episode Obi-Wan, which was hit or miss. I always look for the good, so I'm like, I always think about the Vader and Obi-Wan fight. I'm like, that was amazing. That's what I'll go back and I'll always watch that. That was awesome. But that overall, I feel like the Obi-Wan series had to be an A+ because everyone wanted it for so long, and it finally comes out, and it's like, it was good. I guess it was pretty good. And then Andor, which I think a lot of people but it wasn't the wide net to grab all the Star Wars fans the way like Grogu does or the way like legacy characters do. So fans who liked it freaking loved Andor. And I like Andor a lot too, but my brother's not watching Andor. My dad's not watching Andor. It's like the general fans aren't seeing it. So then you have Obi-Wan, which was all right, and Andor, which is maybe niche, and nothing else. So without Favreau doing Mando and Ahsoka, Boba Fett, say what you want about Boba Fett, it would look very sparse. And I think Kennedy might have been gone a long time ago. So it's interesting. Like I said, I feel like we're in a weird point where, like, OG, you brought it up. You're like, in 16 and 17, she was making these firings. And it's like, she had that capital because she had the $2 billion Force Awakens, the $1 billion Rogue One. I thought Star Wars was freaking invincible. I'm like, they can make a movie about Meeber Gaskin and people will see that for $1 billion. And I hope they do for Steven Stanton. He's a great dude. But you know what I'm saying? And then Last Jedi comes out and Solo after that, which Solo didn't deserve what happened to it. It got marketed with Denny's and they spelled Wookiee wrong. And I won't even get into it. and then all of a sudden it's like, the Russian is cut. Like, we're wounded. Now Star Wars is vulnerable. And then they start second guessing themselves. And I don't know. I'm still hopeful because, like you guys were saying, I still like what's going on and what they're making. I think Ahsoka's killing it. But it seems to me that Filoni is the future. That's
100%. 100%. And it really, it comes down to like these really kind of weird decisions, right? Like you mentioned, John, like the fans were all but begging for more Obi-Wan, right?
Yeah.
begging for it. I mean, it was every celebration. The rumor was, oh, they're going to announce the Kenobi movie. That was all the buzz, right? So it's really weird to me that as a studio, they decided that, okay, that's the show we're going to be cheap on. like that's your bread and butter right there. What do you mean? Like, I don't understand that, like, at all. You know, it's a bizarre decision.
Hayden Christensen for the show. They're like, nah, don't worry about it.
No, we're good. He's good.
We're gravy.
Well, especially when if you would have taken a little bit more time with Kenobi, that could have been another $1 billion movie. I mean, you've got one of the original characters. You've got a prequel character who's really strong. You have that actor coming back. I mean, like, that would have been huge. But no, let's make it into a TV series, which, by the way, we self-acknowledge we're not very good at yet. We have hit or miss TV shows, so we're not sure how to do that. It's just is weird.
Vader Obi-Wan, like, in IMAX with a big budget, like big sweeping score. Now, I liked what Natalie Holt did. She told us, we interviewed her. We were lucky enough to interview her. She told us that she was sort of hamstrung with things she was allowed to use in terms of themes. And then, because if you listen to her Loki stuff, you're like, that's pretty cool. I like that music a lot. Yeah. And she said she had ideas for the young Leia theme. She wanted to make it more playful and childlike. And Kathleen Kennedy, she said Kathleen Kennedy told her, no, I want it to be more assertive and inspirational and stuff like that. She didn't want to downplay the strength of Leia. But I'm like, I think that was a mistake because she's a kid. You know?
Exactly.
So, like, hearing the composer of that show saying Kathleen Kennedy, like, was over her shoulder, like, telling her what to do, is like sort of frustrating. I'm like, let your creatives work. Look what's happening right now with these strikes. You got the executives like saying, like, screw you guys. It's like, let the creative people do the creative thing. You do the business stuff and get out of the room. And I think, like you said, Jay, it may be she has too many hats that she's wearing now, and not all of them fit.
Exactly. Well, and do you remember when Mando season 1 premiered? There was like this big rush by Lucasfilm and Disney to like they were kind of scrambling to get some kind of Grogu merchandise out there. They were caught off guard at how popular that little character was.
Yeah,
and it's like that's that kind of like that tone deaf kind of, like, you know, where it's like, how could you not see that coming? Like, this thing is like the cutest thing in the world. They had no idea this was going to catch fire. That's amazing to me. Absolutely amazing.
Agreed.
Despite Favreau and Filoni in the behind the scenes footage, I forget what they call that show that they did, but they specifically said we knew Gallery was going to break it. Yeah, Gallery. They knew. They were like, we're hiding this from everybody because this cannot leak. The first time we see Grogu must be the first time anybody sees him, right?
Yeah.
So like, it's just like they're not all talking on the same page. Yeah. We got time for one more question here, and I'm going to make it a pretty simple one. Do you think, I'll start with you, OG, then we'll go to you, John. Do you think we're going to get a second season of Ahsoka? Why or why not?
I do believe we will get a second season of Ahsoka. And my reasoning is because this season has been doing pretty good. Honestly, the numbers have been pretty solid. And it's been, for the most part, I think fans have been really enjoying it. And I think from an executive level, you know, you look at a Bob Iger, you know, the C-suite, Filoni, everything this guy touches for the most part turns to gold, and I think they're happy with his work, and his baby is Ahsoka. So I would be very surprised if we don't get a season 2. So, and I'm for it. I think it's great. So I'm all in.
So season 2, yes. What do you think, John?
I think so. I think Filoni's movie is going to end this story of Mandalorian, of Ahsoka, of what eventually we're going to see with Skeleton Crew. I think all those characters are going to sort of play a role in that film, and I think it's going to be huge, and I think it's going to do really well. But I think it's at least 4 years away. So I'm thinking if Andor comes back next year, assuming all the strikes wrap up and they could finish that, and then in 2025, you know, we have a celebration in Japan. There's a lot of samurai influence in Ahsoka and stuff. I could see Ahsoka season 2 being something they promote in 2025 for that release. Then you get Mando season 4, and then before you know it, it's Filoni movie time to wrap everything up. So I think, and also like OG said, like the more linear answer is it's good. Ahsoka's really good. It's doing well, and it just makes sense because I think people, even though maybe people don't watch Rebels, people are still digging what's going on here. So I think it's a no-brainer and inevitable that we'll get a second Ahsoka series.
Interesting. So I am on the other side of this, not because it's a bad series. I really like the series. I think it's phenomenal. Here's my slightly different take on it. I think that they're going to rush that Filoni movie to theaters. I think they're going to try and get that thing to theaters as fast as possible. I think that they're under a lot of pressure. They're sitting on $1 billion. They're sitting on $1 billion a movie potential, and that they're not doing anything revenue wise. And so if I look at that as a financial person, if I'm Iger, whoever replaces Iger, I'm sitting there going like, you're costing me money to put stuff on Disney Plus. If I start to bleed subscribers at any point in time, this is not a good look for me, right? What you can do though is make me money, and you can make me money by putting something in the theaters. So my thought process is that they're going to try and get the Filoni movie, because I don't think, I mean, you could argue that it would be the Rey movie first. We've heard about the Rey movie. I don't have any confidence in anything but the Filoni movie, if I'm being totally honest, based on what we've seen happen before. Not
Mangold either?
Trust me, I want it to happen because it sounds amazing, and I love Mangold. I also loved Patty Jenkins, and then now hearing about Guillermo del Toro, one of my favorite directors of all time. I mean, it's hard for me to to think that they're going to make the decisions that are going to get us there.
No, I hear you, man.
Yeah. So what I do know is that the Mandoverse needs its finale. The Mandoverse needs its closure. I think that they're going to rush it to theaters as soon as possible. So what I think we might get instead of another Ahsoka series is I think we might get like some limited series that look like an Ezra series or a Sabine series. And it's not quite Ahsoka, but that storyline is taking us still towards that movie. So not quite an Ahsoka season 2 so much as other parts of this puzzle are coming together to make that movie what that movie's.
Yeah, that could be cool. Yeah,
that's interesting.
So we'll see. We'll see what happens. But this has been an absolute pleasure, fellas. I thank you so much for joining us, John. Tell the folks out there where they can follow you and where they can get at the Resistance broadcast and all that good stuff.
Appreciate it. Well, first off, thanks a lot for having me. We had a bunch of back and forth of trying to get this lined up, and that's my summer was kind of crazy. So thanks for being patient with me, and thanks for letting me come on. Appreciate that very much. TRB, the Resistance broadcast. We put out 2 episodes a week. Usually Mondays and Thursdays, but when a show like Ahsoka's on, we go live Wednesday nights. And you could find us on any podcast app, whether that is Spotify, Apple, SoundCloud, name it, Amazon, wherever. And then also we have a video version on YouTube, youtube.com/@theResistanceBroadcast. And for me, Johnny Hoey on X, and then also I am set up on like Threads and Blue Sky in case they start charging for X and I don't want to pay for it. Like, why would I want to pay to be yelled at?
Right.
Exactly.
I do that for free at home, so why would I do that? But yes, Johnny Hoey there, and just check us out, the Resistance broadcast on social media at TRB Podcasts. We have a good time there. We sort of like this conversation. We are honest with our opinions. We love most of Star Wars. We look for the good things we like. We don't talk about the things we dislike as much, but when we do criticize, it's done in a respectful way, because that's called being an adult, and that's how you go about your business. So
exactly.
But fellas, it's been an absolute pleasure. So I want to thank you very much for having me on. The hour absolutely flew by, which means I had a good time.
Yeah, absolutely. I had a great time too. OG, tell the folks where they can find you.
You can find me right here at OG55 on YouTube. You can find me on Twitter, OrangeGrow55. You can now also find me on Instagram at OrangeGrow55. And I will be linking the Resistance broadcast and John's X account and everything in the description below. So follow this man and check out the Resistance broadcast. Amazing, amazing work. And John, I just want to say too, you're always welcome back. And even if you like, I don't know if you're into theme parks, but if you want to talk Galaxy's Edge or whatever with us, or you're welcome back to do that too, man. So
I'm down. Yeah, I appreciate it. And thank you very much for all the kind words. You guys are awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. You can find me on X as well at Jay Sherer, and you can also find me on YouTube at How Stories Work with Jay Sherer. Just released a table read of our short film we're filming later this year, come out next year. So go check that out. How Stories Work with Jay Sherer. And as always, if you've got some thoughts about Ahsoka, are we going to get a season 2? What do you think about the state of Star Wars? Leave us the comments down below. Fantastic time, fellas. We will see you. The next week is the finale week, so it's a big week. We're going to be talking about all of that. I'm sure the Resistance podcast will too, so check them out as well. And we will see you later.